I'm your host, Phil Wagner, founder of Sparta Science. Today, I'm super excited. We have Dan Dailey, retired Sergeant Major of the Army. And since 17 years old, he's held every enlisted position in the Army. And the SMA is unique because it travels throughout the Army to observe training and also be talking to the soldiers and their families. It's a very broad role, and some of the ranging of responsibilities and experiences SMA Dailey's had is everything from tattoo policies to headphones and workouts to sexual assault to leadership core competencies. So it's an extremely large range of responsibilities and situations. And after more than 30 years in uniform, he now serves as vice president of the Association of the United States Army, AUSA. And a key piece we want to hit on today is the crucial aspect of leadership is agility. Having the ability to adapt and be relatable to every situation organizations and leaders encounter. And there's, I read something about SMA Dailey about some of these principles he looks at, and he listed off very easily, routed off 10, and I'll just read you a few. Number one was probably my favorite. Yelling doesn't make you skinny. PT does. Another one, if you can't have fun every day, then you need to go home. Another one is, it's okay to be nervous. All of us are. And all these are really about having that agility of walking the walk, but also at the same time being relatable to the soldier. So today, I'm very excited. Want to welcome SMA Dailey to the show.
Yeah, Phil, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And it was an honor and privilege to meet you last week in person in Huntsville, Alabama, and learn a lot about your great company too, and all the things you're trying to do to increase the health and wellness of our soldiers and their families.
Yeah, we might have to use that tagline, yelling doesn't make you skinny.
Yeah, I can trademark that to you if you'd like.
Yeah.
I've already had a college professor steal that top 10 thing for his leadership seminar.
Yeah.
And yeah, if we get in this story about where that comes from, actually, I've been invited all over the world now to talk about those 10 things, and they're actually cynical intentionally, right? So they're supposed to grasp your attention, but they have a very serious and deep meaning, and they have a very broad meaning too. The yelling doesn't make you skinny means a whole lot more than just physical fitness. It's all about presence and being with your people and doing what your people are doing, because that's what people appreciate the most. But it's great to be on the show, Phil.
Yeah, and I think it's great you mentioned the cynicism, because a lot of times, there has to be that balance of this deep meaning, but also we can't take ourselves too seriously, right?
That's
at the
right.
same time.
Yeah, and people remember them if they're funny. So I learned that after 20 years of giving public speeches, and I asked people, "What'd you think of the speech?" And they usually remember the joke. So I said, I got to make these things a little bit humorous so people will remember them and then want to use them. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when we first met, that's one of the things that came across too. When we met is really just listening to you, and how both funny but deep a lot of the comments were. About some of the problems that the Army and really the country is facing.
Yeah.
Right? And how do we deal with some of these large problems, but in a way that's, not too serious at the same time.
Yeah. And some people may not appreciate that, but if you look at it a different way, if you take every problem with anger and frustration, it is met equally by human beings naturally with resistance, right? So, you can show up and be the negative guy that can point out all the problems. We all can do that. You don't need a whole lot of
Mm-hmm.
education to pick out bad things, especially in the Army, because I promise you, we're doing something wrong, on some day, right?
Right.
Right. But it doesn't need to be all miserable every day. Let's stay positive. Even when there's problems, you could stay positive. And people tend to get behind the issue when they see a leader that is not angered and frustrated by the problem, but yet sees it as a challenge that we can overcome as an organization.
Mm. And what are some of the ways that you're able to kind of balance that, right? Because I imagine it's pretty easy to swing to one way or the other, right? Where everything's, because you see it with leaders, right? Some are overly cynical, where everything's like, oh, well, that's how it goes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is the Army, right? On the other side, there can be no fun, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of balance that piece?
It's to gauge the audience, the time, the mission. Obviously, if it's if you got a little bit more time and the mission's not that critical, then it's okay to be relaxed around your subordinates. It's okay that you're a human being, and that's how you want to be observed by them. not some machine that doesn't care about people or just, is focused on something. And then obviously, like you're in combat, you're not going to be very cynical then when you got to make tough decisions. They need to see a competent, capable leader that can make good decisions in a short amount of time that is in their best interest. And I think that's the key to leadership. People tell me all the time, how do you become a successful leader? And I said the first thing is you got to figure out who you are as a leader, and then adapt and change. And then you want to mimic people. You want mentors. You want to emulate the good things and refute the bad, but you still got to be your own leader. You still got to figure out how you as a person can have an effect on those people to get them to do what you want them to do. Because basically, at the end of the day, that's what leadership is. Getting somebody to do something that you need done, right? You've led them. That's the most simplest form, but that's not how you want to do it. You want to do it through, motivation, direction, purpose, care, humility, and because that's a long-lived, effective leadership.
Yeah. I've once heard someone describe it as being in the room when you're not there.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, what are some of the ways you've kind of overcome? I mean, you talked about just now, like the self-awareness of the situation, to use, a overgeneralization, combat versus non-combat, right?
Yeah.
Having that self-awareness allows you to adapt to the situation. But how are some of the challenges that you've seen, and how have you kind of overcome those with the initiatives you had either as SMA or now in your current role?
Yeah, I think the first one is if you know in your heart it's right. Nobody likes change, and if you go into an organization, you're going to be met with natural resistance. So one thing I've learned is if you get the organization or the group of people that you're leading to believe that this is their mission and they believe in the same thing, then it's a whole lot easier to accomplish change, right? It's rather than just walking in the first day and say, I have arrived, here's what's screwed up, and now we're going to fix these things. Unless you intend to do all those fixings yourself, that's probably not the best approach, right? You need the organization to help move that change, right? So some of those are easy. When you come in first week as a sergeant major of the Army and the entire Army's frustrated with the previous tattoo policy, that's a pretty easy one, and it's a big win publicly. But some of it's hard, when you're trying to convince Congress that we need to create a credentialing assistance bill to entertain the other 80% of soldiers that don't want to go to college. And there's nothing bad about that, right? But it's traditional 100 years of thinking that, the only way to succeed in America is to get a degree. And that is a good way to succeed in America, but it's not the only way. And you're talking to a group of people who got to where they are through that traditional education process. And you got to spend 18 months educating on the fact that, well, there's another way that we can empower these young men and women once they leave service or even while they're in service by getting, credentialed. And a lot of times in the MOS that they're in the Army, which is can be a benefactor to the communities that they go back to when they get out, because 100% of soldiers are going to leave the Army someday, right? And we want them to be just as successful in their post careers as they are in the Army, because it tells the next story to the next generation about where they got their start.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and it's interesting that might be one of the few analogies I've seen between the Silicon Valley where I'm at and the Army, is that both need and have recognized that you don't have to go to college. It isn't the only way. I mean, there's even some CEOs out in Silicon Valley that are, giving people incentives not to go to college, right into work. There's a lot of different ways to approach things.
Yeah.
How do you break some of those paradigms? Is critical.
Well, our nation needs both, right? Blended education in my observation, having been the trade ops sergeant major and leading the Army's education enterprise, was we didn't need a full workforce full of higher academic education. We needed a blended workforce, and we need technical certifications. We need laborers. We need just like America, right? And if we tell every kid in America the only way to path to success is to go to college, well, then who's going to be the plumber, the electrician, the welder, the manufacturer, the laborer? And the truth is, not every kid in America is destined to go to college. So why do we tell them all the same thing? And it's a hard paradigm to change, because these are things that moms and dads like to talk about at dinner, where they're sending their kid, right? And it's somewhat become an embarrassment if your child doesn't go on this preferred path of elitism, I guess is the best way to say it. But the reality is you can make more money as an air conditioning technician than you can as an undergraduate college guy with a bachelor's degree or gal,
That's right.
but society doesn't view it that way for some reason. And then we have a very excess population of people who have traditional education from a higher education, and not enough people to fill the jobs in the critical roles that are necessary in the credentialing fields. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's also counter to military service, because that's, going to college is not consistent with serving in the military or becoming a police officer or a public servant. And you can see this phenomenon going on in America, how we're leading our children. And this falls right in the leadership discussion, because, we have to raise the next generation of leaders right now to run this country behind us. We can't send them all on one path, because it just won't work.
Yeah, and that blended workforce is a good label of really what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help approach when you're talking to Congress or other folks about changing the thinking around that? Like, what are some key principles or tactics you found?
Yeah. First one is, as passionate you are about something, your emotion usually does not override another person's perception. What you have to do is present them with facts, be unemotional, calm and collected, and show them, hey, here's the U.S. labor market. 20% of it requires traditional education and higher education, doctors, lawyers, scientists, critical to the success of this nation, absolutely critical. The other 80% is split between skilled and unskilled labor. And what is the economic return on somebody that is credentialed versus that of somebody who is not? It's actually incredible. I used to use my son when I go up on the hill as an example. Before we came on the show, I'm proud of the fact that my son's a mechanical and an aerospace engineer, spent 6 years at college. And I drove him in that direction. So I'm the guy saying, we don't need to drive every kid, but, I drove my kid there. So,
Right.
But I'm not being hypocritical. That's what he was destined for.
Yes.
And I spent several $100,000 doing that, and well worth every single penny. He got a world-class education, and he is in the business that he wanted to be in. He's working for Boeing Aerospace Division to this day. But the reality is, I could have sent him to commercial air conditioning school. The union would have paid for all of it, and he would have made more money the first day out of the door as a commercial air conditioning tech than he did as a rocket scientist in Huntsville, Alabama, which most people don't want to believe, right? It's like, that's not, that it's absolutely true. It is absolutely true. But somehow we got so far off the path of only giving our youth one direction that we're failing. We actually don't lose jobs because of a lack of resources or manufacturer or even labor costs. It's because our inability to be able to source the labor for those jobs in America, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like a big piece, right, is, when you're helping shift paradigms, right, is to limit the emotion, right? Because a lot of times it may come off as rash, right?
That's right.
You're trying to change something and you're overly emotional, as opposed to using data and saying, hey, look, here's the actual situation based on numbers. We should rethink how we're looking at this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, as we said earlier, when you come with somebody, resistance is naturally met with resistance, right? So, and your personal opinion is valuable, especially as you. I know you're a doctor. You walk in with a credential. When you walk in, before someone even knows you, you have been tested by an organization that has proven to produce quality people, right? So you have credentials. When you go up to Congress and you're wearing a uniform, I've been fighting bad guys for the last 30 years in Iraq,
Right.
and I have a PhD in that, right? But I don't in business economics and U.S. labor markets, right? So it's going in there and feeling passionate about it. There's not the way you're going to convince somebody. Obviously, your passion has to be within the work you're doing, but it's really the facts, and that's how you're going to grab their attention. And then what does it mean to them? Well, what it means to them is the product that leaves the Army is a better community member and a higher earner over lifetime and a greater contributor to the U.S. industry. So it's over time, it's a benefactor. And we were able to convince that. Now we have strong advocates on both sides on the Hill on this credentialing initiative, which I'm proud to say has reduced the unemployment rate of post-service military folks to the lowest in the nation's history, and lower than the national average.
Wow, that's a great stat right there.
Yeah.
I think Yeah, and we're the fortunate recipients of two sergeant majors, with no business experience right out of the
Hmm.
army into a Silicon Valley tech company right
Yeah.
away, and just their ability to adapt and really curiosity to learn, is a testament to how the army continues to produce these leaders that
Hmm.
extend beyond service within the armed forces.
Yeah, absolutely. I pride on the fact that that's one thing our soldiers are good at. They're not experts in pretty much anything, but they're pretty good to adapt to anything you throw at them because they've had to live that life. You get dropped off in a foreign country and told to make it happen, you figure it out. And I'll
Right.
tell you, yeah.
Right.
And survival is how the human species have lived on this earth. They've somehow figured it out. And sergeant majors are a good example of that on the battlefield. You give them a mission, they'll somehow figure it out. And soldiers too. I mean, they're incredible. You can't take credit away from the youngest private in the Army. You want to figure out how to get off early and get something done quick, just ask a private. Yeah, he'll tell you.
And with that in mind, as these privates are coming into the army, what do you see as a key piece to the future, of the U.S. Army and training these leaders as they're coming in?
Yeah, I think publicly first, I'd like to say that I don't think there's anything wrong with this generation. I hear that a lot. That's what America has done since America's inception. Blame the next generation for its failures.
Yep.
Interesting history. I'm a history guy. Story. Did some deep looking into this. In 1920s and 30s, there was a nationwide um, belief that that generation was going to destroy America in the future. This is the pre-industrial revolution. This is the agricultural. They expanded the West, literally scraped the ground with almost their hands, right? I mean, and built and expanded America. And then you have the Roaring Twenties, and then the Great Depression of the 1930s. And there was a term that was first used in America called teenager. It was a negative connotation on America's youth at the time. They're smoking cigarettes, they're listening to jazz music, and they're going to wreck America. That became the greatest generation, which is, and that's what I hear a lot of people say today. Oh, these kids, they can't do that. They've been they're on their phones and on the internet all day. And yeah, I mean, but I remind, if we had that stuff since birth, we'd be using it too. But you also have to look at the positives. I mean, they grew up with the world's information accessible within a microsecond in the palm of their hand. You and I, when we went to school, we went to a place called a library to do a book report, drew out a book that some guy or gal wrote 20 years previously,
Yep.
and that's how we learned. Now, who's the smarter person? You see my
Yeah.
point? Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. That's
I
right.
mean, that's right.
The
I mean,
encyclopedia days, right?
yeah, yeah, and they're intelligent. They're capable. They do have different aspects, right? I think with regards to grit and resiliency, there may be there's obviously, and we had less than that of our predecessors because of the lifestyles they had to live, but they're very capable. And then I remind people, they're all we have.
Hmm.
So we got to invest in them, right? And we got to make them the next generation of people who are going to lead this country to great things. And you do that by not shunning them away by saying, this is the way we used to do it, or this is the way we did it, or we're better than you. We do that by encouraging them and saying, and acknowledging and accepting the skills that are different than us and their capabilities, because their attention span is probably one half of that of ours, but their absorption rate is 5 times.
Hmm.
And you capitalize on those things. And in the Army, we actually changed our entire education system to adapt to the way we generations learn. We did a study with Carnegie Mellon about how does the generation today learn. There's misperceptions about whether you can learn as well online or in classroom, and we changed our enlisted education and training program to capitalize on how they learn. And it embracing the next generation is the proper thing to do, and we're going to be in good hands. These young men and women that are willing to serve our country are just as willing and able to do it as previous generations. Our big problem is we have a depleting population of people that are willing to do that. That's our big problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, how does that? I know that that recruiting piece is such a focus for the Army.
Yeah.
How does that start to shift, if at all, or is it something we, to use your word, almost embrace sometimes? Of like, well, maybe it's not going to improve that much. So how do we,
Yeah.
how do we
Yeah.
embrace this situation?
Well, here's, and this is Dan Dailey's opinion. There's a lot of reasons why we're seeing a decline in propensity to serve today. And there's probably no single one for any individual, but my firm belief, having run the recruiting enterprise and then being have oversight of it as the SMA, we as a nation have relied on the military services to recruit. If we continue to do that, we will fail because armies don't fight wars. Neither do navies or marines or air force. They don't. Nations do these things, right? So we fought a war for decades with Russia and didn't even fire a shot, right? So it's the same with recruiting. Armies don't build armies. Nations do that, and the nation is not vested in this at all. At all. No, I'm not saying there's no national hatred. I don't believe that. I don't believe there's national hatred towards the military. It's just they're not invested in building it.
Not a priority.
It's not a priority, and it's just not a focal point. And then you combine that with, we tell every kid, whether they're destined to go there or not, that the only way to success in life in America is college. That's counter, not intentionally but unintentionally, to public service, government service. And unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where, we are convicting parents for paying rowing coaches $500,000 just to get their kid into the college they have to go to so they can, and I see it every night. There's nothing against that. I'm the hypocrite. I know my son went to 6 years of college, right? But he was, we need guidance counselors, teachers, coaches, mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles to drive America's youth in the direction that is in their best interest, not in our personal or public preference, which won't work. It just won't work. And the Army cannot change the perception of an 18-year-old in America that's been influenced for 18 years to do something that's counter to what we want them to do. That's why it takes a nation to build an army. And if it doesn't get behind it, we're gonna have a problem. And this nation's gonna have an army. It has to. If there's anybody out there that believes, we don't need the police, or, I don't want to get in the political divide on this, but the reality is we need safety and security. And there's a whole lot of folks around this world that would exploit the opportunity if we didn't have one. And there's only two ways to build one. You either get volunteers or you tell people to do it. And we've tried both. We've tried both in history. And the best way to do it is to get volunteers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. And I think, in having some of these discussions, one of the things that I tend to do, because I know we're tight on time, is kind of summarizing some of the takeaways behind, your leadership philosophy and some of the things we cover. And I think the biggest thing is, the first point I'm taking away is, when you're in these situations, have that self-awareness, and to use, again, that generalization of combat and non-combat, right? Because it will allow a different approach of, that cynicism or a little bit more casualness versus, okay, we've got to focus on the task at hand.
Yeah.
I think the second piece is how important it is when you are changing paradigms to not become overly emotional.
Yeah.
Right? Because it can come off as rash, and you want to bring data in order to help change the mindset and approach. And the third piece is really embracing the younger generation, right?
Yeah.
Embracing it, because every young generation is questioned. In this case, it's like, well, they don't work very hard. But in this case, they're absorbing a lot more. They're more efficient, right?
Yeah.
They're working as hard. They're working smarter.
That's right. And their intelligence level is exponentially higher than ours. It is. And people don't want to admit that, but it's incredible, the capability. I mean, at 12 years old, I used to sit over there and watch my son watching television while he's writing a book report and typing it like a million words a minute, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I can't even do that today. And his ability to focus on multiple tasks simultaneously. Now, you got to yell and make them listen every once in a while, but hey, exploit the good, let's figure out what it is that we can do it. And you see the generations today, they're doing that. I mean, look at the success of folks today that have that proved that this generation is just as capable. But again, I think our biggest demise, though, in America is we got to have a balance, right? We have to educate youth on what's best in their interest, and sell the fact that there's a whole lot of honorable things to do in this nation besides just go on one single path, right? That's a very honorable thing to do as well. But I think it's critical. I really do. And if we don't start doing that appropriately, I think we're going to continue to struggle with things like public service and, service in the military and and unfortunately occupations that are very well paying, very respected occupations in America that we're having to rely on, labor that for some reason we feel is more appropriate to do it than our own kids.
Hmm.
I'll just say it that way, right? It's yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is just rooted in some of the principles you covered of having that self-awareness and embracing you
Mhm.
know change and variety, right, and
Yeah,
differences amongst each other, but in a way that's in the best interest of the nation.
absolutely. Yeah. I just want to capitalize too something, you opened about the health, and just talk about the importance of that if we could for a quick second, because you mentioned my number one leadership tip was if yelling doesn't make you skinny, PT does. With that, when I give the seminar, I say, and the most important thing you do every day in the Army is physical fitness. And that's not from the aspect of just going out there and doing push-ups and running. It's staying healthy, eating healthy, thinking healthy, because your fitness, your capable, everything is influenced by your fitness, your brain, your mind, your morale, your everything. And when you bring a young man or woman in the Army and you make them fit, it is amazing. You see the change in their capability, their confidence, they just feel good about themselves. And so I used to remind people every day, you might do more important things on any given day, but the most important thing you do every day in the Army is maintain your level of fitness.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, well said. I think people sometimes try to pigeonhole that physical fitness is of just about your physical capabilities, right? Where it,
Yeah.
it just really impacts, everything from your cognitive abilities, your
Hmm.
psychological, your mental state, your ability to plan and manage your time. There's all these factors that PT forces these different cascading impacts.
Yeah. Bottom line, the best soldiers I've had throughout my 30 years of career are the ones who are physically fit, which attributes them to be healthier in their mind and body and soul and their confidence, capability, and most importantly in combat, resiliency, right? So,
Mm.
somebody that's physically fit that unfortunately, gets shot has a higher survival rate exponentially from somebody that's not. Um, and it's just so critical. Yeah, so critical. So I'm glad you brought that point up. When people hear it, they hear the funny. If yelling
Yeah,
doesn't make us skinny, that's right. PT does, but
right.
there's a deeper meaning behind it. It is critically important, and that's why it has and always will be number one.
Mm.
People say, well, it's not all about fitness. Well, it actually is because your brain's not going to function if you're not healthy. That's right.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
just and there's the there's the intangibles too of actually setting your schedule to make time for that
Yep.
and committing to that and being disciplined, which then leads to that same commitment, discipline in the other areas of your day, whether it's family, service, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Well, thank
okay.
you for the time today. That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish we'd come back on again. There's a whole bunch more to talk about. I want to thank you for what you're doing and your team there to help solve some of the Army's physical challenges. We've been doing it for a long time, but that doesn't mean we can't get better. I've learned over 30 years is give everybody the time of day because I promise you somebody's going to educate you. So regardless of how much there's somebody out there that's going to make you smarter on something. So listen and take the time. And you guys did that for me the other day, and I was impressed with the things that you're doing. So thanks for what you're doing.